Japan's shifting demographics have long made headlines. Its people are aging, and there aren't enough babies being born to create the next generations of workers and taxpayers. And while the nation is at the forefront of robotics and animation, it still can't plug the shortfall in human resources. The country is home to 127 million people. That figure is expected to drop to 88 million by 2065. But Japan is already suffering from labour pains. There are now 1.48 jobs for every applicant, the strongest demand for workers in more than 40 years. The government has been promoting domestic solutions to the shortfall. It's been encouraging the corporate sector to change the jobs on offer from contracts and part-time positions to permanent roles, and urging better pay.
We are anticipating added value and higher quality work content for part-time employees as we increase their wages. Also, we are allowing both part-time and full-time employees to be able to take part in the same training for skill development.
It's even looking at ways to entice people, particularly mothers and the elderly, to return to the workforce. In February, Japan had its first Premium Friday to encourage employers to send their employees home a few hours earlier than usual. But one option which the government appears reluctant to look at is immigration. Foreigners make up about 2% of the population. About 50,000 immigrants come to Japan each year. Most of them are students or guest workers. Many foreigners from places such as China and Indonesia are often in low-paying and temporary jobs, like taking care of the elderly. But there is a reluctance amongst politicians and many citizens to make that a permanent remedy to the shrinking labour pool. The onus is on a Japanese answer to a Japanese problem. But for how much longer can the nation ignore a potential solution to its looming demographic crisis? Natalie Pohanen, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Riley Walters. He's a Japan specialist and research associate at the Heritage Foundation. And also from Washington is Shihoko Goto. She is a senior Northeast Asia associate at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Thanks both so much for joining us. Riley, let me start with you. Japan has a traditionally insular culture, so we actually shouldn't be very surprised if the country addresses this labor shortage by looking towards its domestic policy adjustment rather than looking abroad toward immigration. So let me get the consensus between both of you. Can Japan resolve this shortage without actually engaging in much larger scale immigration?
So they've certainly tried over the past few years. One way that Prime Minister Abe has attempted to address the issue is by relying more on robotics to sort of meet not only just manufacturing labor shortages, but also elderly care, different types of care such as children care, dementia, things like that.
Okay, Shihoko, do you think this can be done from inside, from readjusting Japan's domestic policy, or does Japan need to get more comfortable with the idea of immigration?
Well, let me address your second question first regarding immigration. If you look at the demographic situation, it is a ticking time bomb. Nearly 40% of the Japanese population will be over 65 years or more within the next 10, 15 years. That said, immigration hasn't really been a rallying cry either for legislators or from the general public. There is a lot of concern about the social issues that mass immigration will bring. That said, today there is a growing number of foreign workers in Japan, either under the table or by legal means as well. So there is a change. It may be rather glacial compared to Western standards, but at the same time there is a acceptance of foreign workers as well. But in order to address this huge situation, certainly there immigration will have to be considered as one of the tools, but one of the many. As Riley said, robotics is one. And then the other one, of course, is to really make good use of women in the workforce. Women in Japan are highly educated, and yet they are underutilized.
I'd like to get to the issue about women in a second, but I want to hone in on something you said, which is the growing concern about social issues surrounding immigration. Talk to us a bit about that. What are the specific issues with Japan that prevents immigration from being a bigger part of the solution?
Well, Japan really sees itself as a nation of Japanese. This may or may not be correct ethnically. There are a lot of Japanese who are ethnically Chinese, ethnically Korean, and from other parts of Asia. That said, it is a relatively homogeneous society, and the Japanese are very comfortable with it. They believe that the homogeneity has been a source of strength, not a source of weakness for economic growth. And they're very proud of the fact of, especially post-war, that they had this rapid rise in the economy. But the problem with that is that when Japan looks to other countries, especially the United States and Europe, a lot of the problems that Japan sees in these two societies are often seen as a result of immigration policies, rightly or wrongly.
Okay, Riley, let me see if you're on the same page here. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what your personal experience in Japan is, but do you see certain cultural peculiarities about Japan hindering its progress in addressing this problem because there is this reluctance toward immigration?
I wouldn't say, so I would say first that, you already do have sort of a change in Japanese identity with the shrinking population, more migration toward urban areas from rural areas. So you've already got this sort of decrease in rural Japanese culture. The addition of migrant workers, immigration, things like that. Yes, Japan has traditionally sort of waned off immigration, and to a certain degree in the future, Japanese politicians might even be willing to risk a certain level of growth to keep Japanese immigration to a certain level. Now, for growth, obviously, immigration is key, and some of the officials have been looking toward increased immigration. And I think there is room for growth, personally. My own experience, I've lived in both rural and urban Japan, and I think there is sort of this delineage between what is Japanese and what is foreign. But I think there's definitely room for better integration of both, just sort of expanding upon Japanese culture amongst the immigration population.
Okay, Shihoko, I want to get back to you and if you can, address what you were alluding to about the issue with women in the Japanese workforce. There are traditional complexes at play here. Speak to us about what Japan is really up against, trying to better integrate women into the workforce and to fill these jobs.
Right. There's two fundamental issues. One is gender bias, that this is still very much a male-dominated society. And then secondly, there are practices within the workforce that are not conducive to balancing work and family commitments. Regarding the first one about gender bias, one of the achievements of the current Abe administration is to highlight the fact that women can be a source of strength for Japan. There is this phrase called womenomics that really has tried to elevate this, and there have been a number of numerical targets laid out by the Japanese government. Many blue chip companies have adopted numerical targets to increase women in the executive positions. There is a recognition that it is a problem, that women are not reaching their full potential, and there is encouragement from both the public and the private sector to have more women in the workforce.
I'd like to thank you both so much for joining us. Shihoko Goto there as well from Washington.